everyone. Welcome to the Responsa podcast. Please, we want to let everyone know that we're always open for comments and for people's questions. Comments can be sent to responsapodcast@gmail.com. That's RESPONSA podcast@gmail.com. We've been receiving comments, and actually, I think maybe at the end of this episode, we might address some of them. Today, we want to talk a bit about the Federal Reserve. There's a few news updates, and also we want to continue the fallout from Charlie Kirk's murder. You know, there's both the fallout on the right, the fallout on the left, and Josh is going to get us started. Josh, tell us what you've been seeing online in regards to Charlie Kirk's murder.
Yeah, so let's present the timeline in sequential order and kind of see, I think, how a lot of the surrounding elements have become very chaotic over the past 48 hours specifically. So, of course, since we last spoke, we finally caught the murder of Charlie Kirk. It seems corroborated by evidence, DNA testing based on the gun that the shooter left and based on text messages that the shooter sent to his roommate who is in the process of becoming a woman. It seems like the shooter had this gun and that you could connect the dots between all the timelines and everything that was happening. I think we have pretty high confidence that this is who killed Charlie Kirk. He seems to have gotten more political over time and to be texting people on Discord that he hates Charlie Kirk, that he thought Charlie Kirk was divisive. They also found very left-wing, anti-fascist, sort of video gamey, very online meme very meme type bullet casings, some that were shot, but then ones that were not shot that were still in the gun.
Like Bella Ciao.
Yeah, so there was Bella Ciao, which is one of these anti-fascist slogans and was part of this game called Helldiver.
I want to make a point.
Yeah.
Bella Ciao there's videos of Italian sort of UN international human rights workers that go to Israel and sing Bella Ciao in front of Israeli soldiers. The Israelis are
Right,
fascists,
exactly.
we know, it's big
So yeah,
fascism.
So you see this whole exactly. I think you see this ideology that again, clearly he's 22 years old. He's extremely online. He wasn't living with his parents. He had this roommate, and they were apparently into furry type anthropomorphic sexual role play. It's weird. It's very weird. This guy seems a little strange to say the least. And there's evidence about all the things that this guy was revolting against the family home he was raised in. Was apparently very MAGA. His father was a sheriff and a gun owner and seemed to be traditional Republican. And, it's actually crazy that we found out that the father was the one who turned him in. So this is clearly the father's a good, upstanding individual. And it sounds like there was some sort of discord between the father and the child who murdered Charlie Kirk. He seemed to be going off the deep end before he turned himself in. He said he was going to commit suicide, and the father convinced him that he should turn himself in anyway. So there's all these things that are actually happening, right? The escalation and the politicization of what this guy was learning on who knows what subreddits and Discord servers and online memery. But what is so shocking is over the past 48 hours, what has developed in addition is that there is a conspiracy theory coming from the right and some on the far left too, that really, surprise, surprise, the culprit is Israel, and that Israel murdered Charlie Kirk. For any of our listeners who might be surprised to learn that Israel would kill Charlie Kirk because he was a staunch supporter of Israel, here is the theory in its entirety very quickly. So when Charlie Kirk was killed, you already had people like Ian Carroll and Jackson Hinkle saying, well, he started questioning things about Israel. We're not saying Israel did it. He just started questioning things, and we're pointing that out. So we're just asking questions, and we don't trust the feds. So we're just asking questions here. And then Bibi Netanyahu came out. He denied Israel as having any role in this, which of course only fueled the flames, which is very much how their tactic goes, right? So if Bibi hadn't said anything, they would have said, ooh, Bibi is awfully quiet. And then instead, since Bibi did say something, they said, wow, he's so quick to deny it. That clearly shows his complicity in this murder of Charlie Kirk, which we're not saying Israel did, but implying it heavily. Then eventually Candace Owens jumped on the train. She started saying that, listen, I love Charlie Kirk and people don't know, but behind the scenes, I'll tell you, I know from anonymous sources that he was close to becoming Catholic and he was seeing the light and he was asking too many questions about Israel and the genocide, and he was waking up to reality, and they killed him before he could get there. She added that Bill Ackman was pressuring Charlie with Jewish money to take a certain position on Israel and to silence Tucker Carlson and not invite him to TPUSA events. Clearly, there's some nefarious forces of control around Charlie's support for Israel, and he was changing his mind. So she cherry picked these clips of Charlie, playing them on her show, where Charlie says, I don't agree with everything Bibi does, and I don't agree with every single step of the war. Of course, she's cherry picking because there were so many times over the past few weeks where people asked Charlie about anti Semitism. Charlie Kirk said, it has no place in conservatism, no place in America. He actually went to war with the Nick Fuentes Groyper group over this. They tried to infiltrate Turning Point USA. And he said anti Semitism and neo Nazism has no place in America and conservatism. But the idea that he was seeing the light and Israel was silencing him is something Candace is promoting. And then Tucker last night had a live stream on Twitter called America After Charlie Kirk, which seemed like it was going to be a retrospective, a legacy, and about the what Charlie meant as a person. And Charlie and Tucker were definitely friends. And for some reason, Tucker spent an hour talking to Megyn Kelly about how if you say something bad about Israel, people call you an anti-Semite and they're losing support. It's time for people to wake up that Israel is controlling things. It's just like that was a crude summary. I obviously am not bringing exact quotes here, but that was pretty much the sentiment, which seems to be going down this rabbit hole now of Israel did it and moving the goalposts now to you don't have to prove anymore whether Israel actually committed anything. All you have to do is poke a hole in the official FBI story, say, oh, these texts were doctored or this timeline doesn't make sense, and then show that Charlie didn't sufficiently support Israel. And then you could connect those dots to say Israel murdered Charlie Kirk, even though there's zero evidence. And there's all this real evidence that it was nothing about Israel, that it was this leftist online radical who hated Charlie Kirk for his political views. It's just crazy. I think we see so many things from this, but after my long, detailed timeline, first tell me what you think.
No, so first of all, there's the Benjamin Franklin quote, right? That nothing is certain in life except death and taxes. And I think at this point we could say nothing is certain in life except death, taxes, and that whenever something happens, you could find a way to connect it to Israel. I mean, it was a foregone conclusion. Like the second this happened, okay, we know that they're gonna start blaming them. And to be fair to Nick Fuentes, he's a crazy guy, but he's like, "Hello, guys, you're being crazy. There's no evidence that it's Israel. It's just like poor." And it reflects a few things. First of all, it also reflects like these people really have nothing to talk about, like Candace and Tucker. They don't really know they're just trying to get clicks, and they know that Israel is a good one to get clicks. So let's talk about Israel. Can we talk about the substance of Israel? He was an evangelical Christian, a certain type of Republican, that he was in college campuses. Like there's so much to talk about. We should talk about this. And of course, they're very upset. I think another element is that Benjamin Netanyahu came on Fox News and talked about Charlie Kirk's legacy in Israel and what he meant to the people of Israel, which again, what do you expect from the Israeli president? You want him to come on Fox News and talk about what Charlie Kirk had to say about abortion in America? If he had done that, Candace Owens would have had even more fuel, right? So he talked about Charlie Kirk's relationship with the state of Israel, and Candace is very insulted by this. For her, it's like, oh, you're ruining the legacy of our Charlie Kirk. First of all, I didn't know that Charlie Kirk was your son. We can't talk about him because you're offended. They love accusing people of canceling them. Like they're canceling Netanyahu now. They're not. He's not allowed to. You know what? Like when someone dies, people are going to talk about him. That's just the world, right? And it's just also this desperate attempt. Why are you desperately trying to claim Charlie? This is what we talked about last week. There's this immediate martyr, icon. Everyone needs. This is going to be my Charlie. He's my Charlie. I understood Charlie. It's like there's a song in France, a political song that said 20 years after de Gaulle, every party is a Gaullist party, right? Every party is claiming the mantle, right? And here it didn't take 20 years, it took 5 seconds. So there's that element of this. And also what I think is another element is the level on which we see that there's no accountability from these people. And again, this is a subtle point, but this cheap shot at Israel, there's no accountability for Candace Owens. She's not going to take accountability for any time she accused Charlie of anything. anytime she was critical of Turning Point. It's hypocritical. We know that she broke away from Turning Point. She had her issues with the
She was
mainstream.
kicked out of Turning Point.
Right. She was kicked out of Turning Point. She obviously doesn't want to talk about that, and there's no discussion of that. And also, as actually, to be fair to Nick Fuentes said, like, there's no accountability in these claims. Meaning, like, Nick Fuentes pointed out she's claiming that Charlie Kirk sent a letter to Netanyahu, and I think Candace is saying she has the letter. First of all, why would she have the letter? Like, why would Charlie Kirk send her the letter if he's sending it to Netanyahu? But more than that, if you have the letter, so then show it. She put it behind a paywall. Nick Fuentes called that out. I was like, okay, there's no backing up for these rumors. So I really think it's very boring and sad that we can't have a more meaningful discussion.
Yeah, I agree. I'm very happy you raised this point. There's so much to parse through here because it touches on so many different things. First of all, I think it touches on that Charlie Kirk was multifaceted for our Jewish modern Orthodox listeners out there. We know that when Rabbi Soloveitchik passed away, everybody, similar to your De Gaulle point, would claim Rabbi Soloveitchik as our own. He was a Zionist. He was yeshivish. He was college educated philosopher. He didn't really believe in philosophy, right? So everybody kind of saw Rabbi Soloveitchik in their own way. And in that sense, it was, as people would say, a Rorschach test that you see yourself presented in his avatar. And I think because people who are multifaceted present themselves differently, sometimes that happens. And Charlie Kirk was like that. Marjorie Taylor Greene, for example, released texts where Charlie was being very cordial and inviting her to speak at Turning Point USA events. But that doesn't mean Charlie Kirk agreed with her. It was clear from the text. She actually deleted the tweet since then because everyone called her out, number one, because she explicitly said in the tweets, I don't want any other religion dictating Charlie Kirk's legacy, which she obviously means Jews and is pretty overtly anti-Semitic as you could be without saying Jews. So she deleted the tweet for that reason, but also because it made her look foolish. She was trying to show, look, Charlie invited me. That means he agrees with all my positions on Israel. And people were saying, no, that's not who Charlie was. The whole point is he believed in free speech. So by that standard, he would invite Dave Smith and Josh Hammer. He doesn't agree with both of them. They had radically different views, but he believed that debate is how you should play out your political disagreements as opposed to rage and fighting and becoming polarized. So sometimes so for example, Dave Smith, it's so sad that everyone's doing this now, that they're releasing their texts with Charlie to social media. It's really it's terrible. The only thing I don't mind is, Bill Ackman was forced to do it because he had to discredit what Candace said about him, which we'll get to in a second. But, Dave Smith also said Candace is asking people to release their text with Charlie. Charlie Kirk said, and obviously Dave Smith used this as an opportunity to promote himself. Dave Smith said, Charlie Kirk really liked my episode on Joe Rogan with Douglas Murray. And that shows that I'm not saying it means he agrees with me, but probably that's what it means. And again, I would just say, no, he likes debates. He likes ideas. And that doesn't mean he agrees with you on everything. He was a nuanced person, and even his relationship with Israel was very nuanced and different than what very pro-Zionist people might have said. So I think it's very unfaithful, like you're saying, to when posthumously people are trying to claim Charlie as their own. I find it very disgusting and inhumane. And even JD Vance, to his credit, said on Twitter just an hour ago, people need to stop this. The guy's not even buried yet. Let's grief together first before we start pointing fingers at whose movement was Charlie a part of. And the
Right.
second thing is really important that you're touching on, the idea of no accountability. And I think this is actually very important for the state of media. We know that for years, discourse was dominated by traditional media, and they shaped narratives. You could chart this back much before 2020 or 2019, going back to Walter Cronkite and Vietnam War and how the media's perception of things shaped public ideas. But people by 2020, I think, were very upset by that. Understandably, they weren't convinced by what the media was saying, and it became very clear that they were no longer non-biased, but instead trying to push an agenda and a narrative. It broke out into, really starting with Daily Wire, but eventually coming to a head in COVID, all of these independent podcasters and independent mediaites doing their thing. But that combined with also now Elon Musk's Twitter is so dangerous because Candace is now able to go on her show. She could literally make any claim she wants. And like you said, she has no accountability because she's getting all her money from followers, clicks, and ads. So as long as she has people watching, she could say anything. And to prove defamation in the United States is so difficult, so arduous, because you have to prove malicious intent, which means that you have to show that she doesn't actually believe what she's saying, which I think she does. To prove to win a defamation case is almost impossible because we have very expansive free speech laws, especially for journalists. That's how you have a good democracy that thrives. For example, she said, I'm shocked no one was talking about this on Twitter. She said yesterday, before her show aired, I spoke to the family of the roommate of the shooter of Charlie Kirk. Right. So the shooter, he had this roommate who seemed to be transitioning as a transgender person. And she said, I spoke to the family, and my sources tell me that we're not being told everything. And so she just presented that on her show. She didn't even show any documentation, not even a fake email. She just said it. I spoke to these people, and we're not being told everything. So she could, it's like Michael Scott, I declare bankruptcy, and therefore now it is true. And I was thinking myself, I should really make a fake email and tip Candace and see if she rolls with it. I would love that, if not for the danger in doing that. But because she would, that's how this goes. And now, oh, you could just claim, Nick Fuentes is a CIA agent. And now the burden of proof is on the person to disprove it. That's how they're operating. It's so crazy to me because anytime there's pushback, they become even more cemented in their positions. You saw this with, again, if you watched Megyn Kelly last night, she says Epstein was maybe Mossad. And then everyone started pushing back on me. And she's like, I don't understand. I'm not allowed to just ask questions. It's like, no, you're not just asking questions. You're throwing things out there without rigorous proof, without any journalistic standards, without the accountability that happens when you're part of a news broadcasting ecosystem with journalistic integrity. And you don't have to worry about people getting you in trouble, right? You're worried about yourself and your clicks. So it promotes divisiveness. It promotes hot takes and crazy breaking news. And then people, the flying monkeys on Twitter, will just air this as truth. So, for example, also, Candace Owens just put out a theory once. Daily Wire is going out of business. Daily Wire is bankrupt. And here again are these straws I could pull at to prove circumstantial evidence that the Daily Wire is going out of business. And don't worry, I have a lot of anonymous people behind the scenes telling me things. So it's always like you could create, at that point, you could create any narrative. And here's what I want to finish before I pass the baton to you. I think that's also ironically creating this echo chamber of new media. The critique of old traditional media was there was this echo chamber, you couldn't really say what you wanted. Is this any different? Candace Owens and Tucker Carlson are on the top of this right-wing pyramid, and everybody's afraid to go after them. I think because, and I'm not talking about executives like Ben Shapiro, who probably has an NDA and can't talk about her. And by the way, he's very fiery on Tucker Carlson. I'm not talking about people who legally are barred from speaking. I'm talking about Megyn Kelly, who, if you look at her tweets from 2 years ago, was calling Candace out for her behavior. And yesterday on her show said, Candace is brilliant. She is genius. She is just so smart. It was very sycophantic. And I'm not saying Megyn Kelly's an anti-Semite. My point is that I think what we've created is this new media empire that is built not on journalistic integrity, but on I can make up any story about you. And so anybody who goes after me, you better watch out. And that's a very dangerous thing. And that incentivizes people to be silent, to be cudgeled into viewing things a certain way. If you're pro-Israel now, you're a Zionist, you're a Jew lover, you're not America first, you're Israel first. So you're not actually allowed to say what you believe anymore, or you're going to get taken down by the top, which in control and gets the most views. For people who make their career as independent journalists like Megyn Kelly, Glenn Greenwald, whoever it is, there's a lot of them. They are incentivized to just take whatever the ideological purity test is that day as their position.
Yeah, I don't deny that. I think you're right. You see many similarities to what happens when a political movement gets too comfortable. It starts bickering with itself and fighting itself. and not analyzing what there is to analyze. And again, I will say, like, I don't think we should get stoked in these conversations. Honestly, I just, Nick Fuentes, again, he's a crazy, basically terrible person. He's a racist, but he's the most honest and he's quite funny. So, and, I basically wish him luck, ironically, that he should tell Candace and Tucker the truth, which is that they're just being ridiculous. And these people should, continue to fight each other, because I want to sort of speak about things that are actually important. I'll begin
Exactly.
that with a listener email from Daniel, who's a friend of ours from the United Kingdom. And Daniel brings up guns once again, like American gun laws, and we will discuss that. He also said something interesting. He said, "We started the podcast last week by calling Charlie Kirk right wing." And he writes, "Do you think labeling conservative commentators as right wing does them a disservice? The term often gives those on the left a reason to dismiss arguments before any real discussion begins. Historically, right wing also carries connotations that many wouldn't want to be associated with." So historically, I mean, I suppose the Germans were right wing, but the communists were left wing. Right and left is simply, it's derived from, in the French Revolution, the people who were more conservative sat on the right, and the people who wanted more full revolution and eliminating the king sat on the left side. It's just a term. And I think that actually what the shooting of Charlie Kirk and our time today reminds us is that we have to know the real meaning of a term. Fascist, it means something, really. It means, Bella Ciao. It was written in I think it was in the 1930s, right? It was in Italy, and it was the partisans against Mussolini's government. Fascism was started by Mussolini in Italy. Nazism, right? Not everyone is a Nazi. National Socialism is a specific movement from a specific time. And if you go around calling everyone a Nazi, these terms have no meaning. It's the same thing with right wing, left wing. Communism is part of the left, and fascism is part of the right term, and that's okay. You don't need to panic about it. I want to also address the other part of Daniel's email here, that when we label someone as conservative, the left will immediately dismiss arguments before any real discussion begins. And in fact, this is exactly what happened. The New York Times, within one day of Charlie Kirk dying, they wrote something about Charlie Kirk's views, and they just completely, misattributed quotes to him. They said he was an anti-Semite when he clearly was not. Again, this is one day after he was dead, and they had to issue an apology on that. They said he was an anti-Semite when he was clearly a supporter of the state of Israel.
I think they said his tendency to lie knows no bounds.
Right. And they also had another quote about Charlie Kirk. They had rewritten a quote he made about black women to basically make it sound like he had said that black women are not as smart as white women. First of all, he did not say that. They rewrote the
what he
quote.
actually said was, Kamala Harris is not smart, and neither is Ketanji Brown Jackson. Then they extrapolated. He said all black women have a low IQ,
according to Charlie Kirk. Right. And again, this is one day after he's dead. And what I saw is people were saying, it's like the left is so tone deaf. They're so tone deaf till this guy just died. There are people who now think this guy's a martyr, and you are so tone deaf to his opinions and the discussions around him that you're just presenting these falsities. And what it really reflects is that the left is so ingrained in its echo chamber, because yes, the Trump administration is in power right now. I could say, we've discussed this before, I'm a student at an Ivy League. Charlie Kirk died, and the next day was 9/11. It passed as if nothing happened. I literally, you wouldn't have known that Charlie Kirk was dead, or that 9/11, it was that it was 9/11, right? And these people are in such an echo chamber, they just immediately say, oh, he was a right winger, so he must be a bad person and an anti-Semite. It's so deeply ingrained in the left. I'm a big fan of Daniel, but also his question is kind of like, that's part of the problem. Like, we have to be able to say, yes, this person was right wing, and you should know his arguments. You should know what the other side thinks. It was this historic cliche that on the right, we have to know what the left thinks, right? We have to be aware and tailor our arguments to respond to what they're saying. But in the left, they really have no idea what's going on in the MAGA right. And I think that's like, when I saw this in the New York Times, it's reflective of, we really are not talking to each other in this country, and it's very unfortunate.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think a lot of it is connected to the Charlie Kirk discourse, because the New York Times will often use right wing as a slur, right wing provocateur, right wing extremist. But then when Hassan Piker writes his op-ed, he's a commentator on politics, right? So there is this tendency on the news and journalists to call people right wing when they really want to discount their views. And that is really bad. Like you said, how many times is right wing conjoined with fascist or Nazi? Right. He was a right wing fascist. And like you said, therefore, I don't have to listen to anything he said. That is really it's not a good sign, and I think it's actually ironic. I wanna say 2 things. Number 1, it's ironic because I think a lot of the right wing, and maybe you'll push back on this, is actually very intellectual, like actual right wing people, which is what makes it funny that it's become this slur. Classical conservatives who would identify as right wing, I'm not talking about populists, I'm talking about classical conservatives, are generally very much in tune with political philosophy. And they will have debates where they invoke political philosophy and who is right. Is it Locke? Is it Burke? And there's the Claremont Institute, and there's Hillsdale College, and all these higher institutions of learning dedicated to fighting out conservative ideology in a very intellectual way. People have written papers about this, and most of the great political philosophies from the 1700s are boiled down into different arguments in today's world, whether it's Rousseau, Hobbes, Rawls, Adam Smith, putting them against each other and trying to flush out who's right. Could you combine these natural rights, natural morality, natural law, and common law? I just find that progressivism, and I could be wrong here because I don't know enough, but to me, who is the intellectual prowess or intellectual father of progressivism? And a lot of it is Karl Marx, and then Edward Said, and then Michel Foucault, and not in chronological order, and Fanon. So those are the most extreme, like on the progressive side, the ideological conversations are only on the most extreme Jacobin sort of side of things. And even still, it's rooted in a lot of emotion, right? They're not arguing like, was Fanon right and should we accept? It's more like, no, he is right. How do we apply it to America and tear down society, right? Or it's not, is Marx right? Or what's the difference between Marx, Engels, Lenin, and Trotsky? What's the difference between socialism and communism? I haven't really seen any of that sort of intellectual rigor taking place. It's more acceptance that this is right. I guess this is what happens when you believe in Foucault, right? There's no truth, there's no knowledge, it's just power structure. So here's what we want, and then we could tear down society. But it's more, and I'm not saying progressives don't think. They have ideas for sure. How do we have good economic policy? How do we run cities? I'm not saying they don't have ideas, but it's just ironic to me that in terms of intellectual higher education, right wing has become this slur and this automatic instinct to discount it as fake and false and Nazi and fascist, when in reality, a lot of the political philosophy that we derive all of our politics from comes from these right wing conversations and very right wing things. So I'm just pointing out that irony. But that's my first point. I just want to hear what you think on that. I could be totally wrong.
Yeah, I mean, I think on the one hand, the political left controls the universities and the centers of academic discussion. That's why whole new ecosystems had to be created on the right, like Hillsdale College. But ironically, when you have the domination of the university, there's no discussion. And so the discussion is very debased, and you can have lots of professors who read Fanon and so on. But is the discussion really that complex? Is there really an intellectual vibrancy, or is it more the student show? I understand what you're saying, and I think you have a point. I mean, again, there are people out there doing this deep dive into postmodern thought, but it's not what drives the left at all. To be fair, I'm not sure these intellectual debates that you're talking about drive the political right, but they are always there and they are important.
I'm not even talking about politics. My point is, let's say someone like Ben Shapiro is a good example. He was a Claremont guy. He went to Harvard. He's clearly very well read, but and even to this day on his show will bring up political philosophy and things that are very intellectually serious, and they would castigate him as right wing provocateur activist. Not serious at all, as opposed to saying we disagree with him, but he has ideas and wisdom that we disagree with. So I just think it's that instinct to not take it seriously when there's actually a lot of seriousness inherent to, and I'm not talking about all people. There are populists out there. And like you said, there is this sort of Freudian postmodern work that is being done, but it's very weird. It's not actually intellectually so serious. The institution of higher learning. I think of Walter Kern's essay from the 90s about his time at Princeton and higher education, that basically what his classes were looking at authors or works and then deconstructing them and criticizing them. And what mattered less were the ideas. The ideas were seen as childish and foolish. What mattered more were the presumptions of the people reading the ideas, meaning, when you read this, what is your background that made you interpret something this way in this, again, very Foucault postmodern way of looking at things? So I just I think it's funny that at the level of ideas, conservatives actually are very serious. Even with Charlie Kirk, I don't agree with everything he said, and I think he had a lot of populist tendencies, but he clearly read books also. He was well versed in some books. You could say they were just his talking points or his debates where he would own the libs, but he still knew books. He still knew political philosophy. He knew what the founding
Right. Which is
fathers
always
said.
a good start.
Yeah, exactly. He knew what the
At
founding
least he
fathers
had a
said,
book.
and he wrote a book. He tried to write he tried to be the intellectual arm of MAGA. He wrote the book on MAGA doctrine. You might not like MAGA doctrine. I'm not really a big MAGA doctrine fan either. I don't even know if there is one. But he was trying to intellectualize these populist ideas, because I don't think he was as big a populist as people are making out, but also because I think there are a lot of conservatives who are fighting on the level of ideas that people are discounting without reason and without cause. Oh, he was just a racist. That was, I forget her name, Atia something, who got fired from the Washington Post. And Joy Reid also played a whole thing. He was just a racist, because then you don't actually have to contend with these ideas. And it's a great way to dehumanize someone. And we're seeing the same thing, I think, with the woke right that we were talking about. Like, oh, if Bill I'm going to accuse Bill Ackman of something. And then they make all, oh, if you want to defend yourself, Bill Ackman, let us know. And then Bill Ackman defends himself. And they say, wow, Bill Ackman, when he denies their claims, has his receipts in order and disproves all their accusations. And they say, oh, see, you're part of a Zionist system that lies, or you're just a Zionist. I don't have to take your word for it. So it's the same sort of dehumanization that you could throw out someone's ideas and arguments and facts by attacking them as a person and where they come from.
Right. I think you are making good points, and I do think it's very disappointing, the lack of political discussion, the inability to have intellectual debate.
Yeah, and
Again, like,
and by the way, I don't want people to respond and say, Josh hates left and progressive people. I'm not. I actually think there are so many ideas in political philosophy that they could attach themselves to. Like I said, Rawls, Rousseau, Hobbes, Nietzsche, maybe Machiavelli. Like there are interesting discussions that could be had that I think maybe at one time were had. Just nowadays it's more of the Said Foucault, anti-colonial, post-truth, deconstruction, anti-establishment sort of thinking without actually dealing with things at the level of ideas. That's more my point. And so then it just makes me even more upset when people provide that same thinking when they dehumanize Charlie Kirk and
right.
calling him a racist.
No, I think your point about the left is reflective in that New York Times article. There was no substantive discussion. It was more just like, well, he's right wing, so he must, use these. Should we confront his ideas? Could there be, maybe he's saying something new? No, it's just this.
Not to mention that an obituary is not the appropriate place to challenge someone's ideas,
Right,
especially the day after he was murdered.
right. I mean, yeah. And I think that, the left is really struggling to respond to this in many ways, because also what's interesting is the left, this is their best tool, right? The spectacle, the compassion, the martyr, that's what they're very good at, this sort of emotional politics. And suddenly they don't have the emotional ball anymore. It's right now with all these podcasters who are claiming Charlie, my child, you know what I mean?
Scares me too, by the way. I think there are mobs brewing on both sides.
I agree with you, but I think the left is, like, given your points, their lack of intellectual substance, that they are particularly unprepared and lacking in the tools to respond when, this time you guys don't get to press the emotional buttons. You have to be able to respond. There was a famous French politician who in a debate said, the left does not have the monopoly on compassion. Right now, this is one of those moments.
I think it connects to something I've been thinking about the past few days, which are the roots of this go back a very, very long time, all the way to the Second Temple era. And I'm thinking of putting this together more, but to flush it out here first, it recalls to mind the early Gnostics. And Gnosticism was an offshoot of Judaism and part of early Christianity that was eventually not part of what became the church. But the essential idea of Gnosticism, so Gnost, in I think it's Greek, is knowledge. And what they proposed in response to the classic question that every religion has ever asked: why is there evil? So their response to that, instead of saying evil is also part of God, or like pagans that there must be two gods, one of good, one of evil. So their response was, actually, the God of the Bible is not the real God. The real God is this hidden force that we don't know about. And the God of the Bible who created, us, is the demiurge, it's called. He's hiding the truth and has corrupted us by putting the soul of the human being into flesh. And that is corrupting society, it's corrupting us, and it's not the truth. And so the effect of Gnosticism is, instead of religious virtue being about ethics or action, they explicitly say this in their writings, even though there's disparate sects that emerge, but the most common idea behind it is the religion is about the knowledge. That's what, again, Gnosticism is the knowledge. To be Gnostic means all you have to do is learn that the God that created you is not the real God, and that there's this guy behind the scenes who's really the real God, and that all of the things happening in your life are part of this secret conspiracy that you are being sold in the Old Testament. And knowledge is therefore all you need. I think we're seeing a very similar thing on both the left and the right. That's why it goes even to this intellectual rigor idea. You don't actually have to debate ideas and know what to do, etc. All you have to know is there's a secret conspiracy to keep you down. So whether it's Foucault saying that the structures that are in place are just reflections of power keeping you oppressed, or again, it's the Candace Tucker that there are foreign influences and CIA, straitjackets holding you down. And if you notice it, then you will be initiated into the secret club and dark corridor that we will allow you into. That is part of this Gnostic tradition. It dulls the senses to actually thinking critically, because it tells you that all you need is to think about one thing. You just have to notice it. You have to use a term I think that'll fit very nicely here, you have to awaken to it. What do you think? That's what woke is. All you need is to perceive it with the senses. That is the end of religious virtue in this sort of schema of things. And so it's very dangerous, and it's leading to a breakdown in discourse where I can't say anything because I'm just a reflection of the false God if I say something that you don't like. And that's a very dangerous thing. For example, I found this is from Hans Jonas, who wrote a book called Gnosticism and Modern Nihilism. He wrote, far from being chaos, the creation of the demiurge, meaning this world that we exist in, the antitype of knowing, is a comprehensive system governed by law. In his words, he's saying they admit that this world that we live in does have a system of law and order. But cosmic law, once regarded as the expression of a reason with which man's reason can communicate in the act of cognition, is now seen only in its aspect of compulsion, which thwarts man's freedom. So even though it is real, it exists, it is meant to be this order, it's really only existing as an order that is meant to corrupt you, so you could basically write the whole thing off as fake. And this, he goes on that for the Gnostics, contrary to the
But so
Stoics, man's alienation is
so
not to be overcome, but is to be deepened and pushed to the extreme for the sake of self redemption.
all right. So Josh, I want to put your comments in about Gnosticism. This is a very highbrow intellectual discussion. And there was a famous Eric Voegelin. So Eric Voegelin was a famous philosopher after the Second World War. And of course, most of the philosophers after the Second World War were very liberal. They said, look at what the Germans did, look at what the Nazis did, Hannah Arendt, and so on. They had different ways. Eric Fromm, different ways of understanding how the Nazis rose to power. And Voegelin, who was also, I think he was from Germany or maybe Austria, he had to escape. He was a little more conservative and traditional, and wrote about Gnosticism as well, the medieval sort of corruption of Christianity. And it's a very strange set of ideas. I can't say I'm an expert in them. I think it has to do with, I think you've tried to describe it, a spiritualist kind of philosophy. But Voegelin already connected Nazism and communism to Gnosticism, in the sense that at the heart of this idea of Gnosticism is this anger at the world and alienation from the world, and that the only way to change things is through some group which has a special vision could
Liberation.
come and change it, like
Yeah.
liberation. And this group can liberate the world in this way. He connected that to Marxism, that Marxism is this revolutionary group and the proletariat needs to come. And similarly, the Nazis, the only way to save the world is through racial purity. I guess I'm not sure populism is the same as that. Yes, there are anti-Semitic elements within populism and the wokeism today. I do think there definitely are some religious elements within wokeism. I'm not sure Gnosticism is the perfect example, but I understand where you're coming from in that these are basically spiritual ideologies, wokeism, and then on the right, these sort of spiritual elements of the Trump movement where you have these ideas of nothing is true and what can we know? The world is being secretly run in these ways. There are religious elements here, with like speakers who like I'm gonna uncover the truth and we're not being told everything. These are like I remember watching a Tucker Carlson episode once and he said the word truth so many times. It's just, truth is a religious word, a metaphysical, philosophical word. When politics is there truth, I mean, there's not so much truth in and again, I guess that's also a left-wing contention that there's no such thing
Yeah.
as truth,
I want to read. I have to find it, but Candace Owens. So when the New York Post reported on the Bill Ackman thing, I'm trying to see if I could find it. The New York Post responded to this whole story, and Candace Owens. So they reached out to her, said, "Candace Owens, you want to respond? That's a pretty journalistic thing to do. Very normal that we're gonna write an article about you. Do you want to respond? And we'll put it in the article." So the New York Post put out this whole story of how Candace Owens accused Bill Ackman. And here's what her comment was when the New York Post reached out to her. And it goes exactly with what you just said about the left wing progressive post truth world. She said, "I have no interest in participating in another predictable radical Zionist hit piece, which will achieve zero real world impact. The current awakening of the masses as to the occupied state of our nation is inexorable."
All right, well,
Wow.
there you go.
So, I mean, that's just straight out
Inexorable.
of the
What was that word there? What was that?
inexorable.
Inexorable. Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, listen,
It
you
sounds
know,
straight out of the 20th century. And I think it is
right,
very much like what you said from Vogelin.
right,
This sort of grievance politics turned to collective rage against this
right.
nefarious back force that's controlling things.
I think we have discussed this enough today. And I have to say, it's important. I also want to reflect. We have another listener email. It's from Lord Grantley again. And he was just thanking us for our last episode on Charlie Kirk. He said that in the UK, Charlie Kirk is not as well known, and he appreciated us sharing light on him. He said there will be a big hole to fill, and your podcast is a light in the right direction. So, that's good to hear. The reason I brought up that email is also because Lord Grantley is in the UK, and I want to sort of contrast what we're saying with what Trump is in the UK right now. He's meeting the king and Prince Charles. There's a lot of pomp and circumstance. The soldiers with the big furry hats. Speaking of furries, but anyway, what it reflects is whilst we're having this civil war between like Candace Owens and Nick Fuentes, Trump is meeting the king, right?
Right.
And Trump is establishing himself in historical terms. I think it's also a very interesting time for Trump to go to the UK. The UK is having some serious budgetary issues. A few weeks ago, there was a shuffling on the cabinet with Keir Starmer, and more than that, there was just like last week there was a big rally in London by Tommy Robinson.
I was about
called
to
like
say.
right, Unite the Kingdom rally, where a lot of very right-wing British people or people who are fed up with immigration and so on.
I think I was going to say he attributed a lot of that to Charlie Kirk and that he was doing it in Charlie Kirk's memory. And
really, I didn't know that.
if I'm not mistaken.
So, but I think it's interesting that Trump's visiting at that time. For example, Sadiq Khan, the mayor of London, wrote an article in The Guardian saying we don't need Trump and he's brought too much radicalism to our country, but you're going to make way for the leader of the free world. Trump is passing everyone in this discussion and entering this level of international fame. Also, meanwhile, in international news, we discussed France, where the government collapsed last week and they have a new prime minister. The reason they collapsed the government is because they were going to pass a budget that was going to make lots of cuts, and people were very upset. And so the government collapsed. This new prime minister has scrapped like the most unpopular things out of the budget, but not the whole budget. And so there's still going to be a lot of rioting apparently this week in Paris or all over France. I guess it's not so much news in France, but I think it's important. And then lastly, let's discuss what happened today at like 2:30 today, which was that the Federal Reserve decided to cut interest rates. We've been discussing the summer. There was a spot to fill in the Federal Reserve Board, and it was filled by Stephen Mirren, who was on the economic advisors to the executive or to President Trump and the Treasury. Stephen Mirren is taking a leave of absence from his advising role to the Treasury, and now will be sitting with the Federal Reserve, which people are concerned, maybe he could pass notes on to the Treasury and the president, which people are upset about. We've discussed this. Maybe that's not the worst thing. Maybe they should work together more. On the other hand, maybe there needs to be Fed independence. Today, it was decided to cut the rate from 4.25% to 4%. There's a lot of hinting that they'll cut more. And this is coming off like inflation is 2.93%, which is unfortunate because it was 2.7% like last year, I think. So it's too bad because they wanted to keep fighting inflation. But the job reports haven't been good this summer. The Federal Reserve decided to cut the interest rates to fight what's appearing to be a lagging economy. I think that's important news to not get lost. I think our listeners want to hear about that. And, it's also reflective. There's a real discussion in the economic world right now. Like right now, there's not a clear, there's sort of like different pedals that can be pushed. And there's also tax cuts coming. So maybe those will stimulate the economy. And then maybe you could make the argument based on that the Federal Reserve should have kept the interest rate steady because the economy was already going to get a sort of stimulus. And I think what's interesting in this time is you see inflation, since COVID, it's really become part of American life. And people are saying we're not fighting inflation anymore. We might have to accept this 2.9 rate. Hopefully it will get lower. People think inflation comes from the tariffs and the price increases from that. People are hoping that companies will continue to swallow the price of tariffs, which can keep prices low. But, maybe they won't. And maybe they'll say, well, now there's stimulus in the economy. We can increase our prices. I think what's interesting is just in pop news, Larry Ellison. So he's the head of I think he helped build Google. He's the head of Oracle.
Oracle.
Yeah. So I think he was involved in Google or maybe Microsoft.
Microsoft.
But either way, he became like the richest person because Oracle is, now I think he's still not the richest person, but he became the richest person for 5 minutes because Oracle is transitioning to AI. We got a lot of investment for that. And I think what it's reflective of is we even see inflation affects the richest people in the world.
Oh yeah, because their money is not liquid. So
well, it's not just that. It obviously doesn't affect them in the sense that they can't buy what they want for dinner. But Larry Ellison just made $100 billion. So Larry Ellison picked
you're saying rich people aren't evil? Is that what you're saying?
No, that would be a crazy thing to say. Obviously,
capitalist. How dare you say big capitalist? See, that's exactly
right. But I just think it's ironic that I'm not suggesting that he's became the wealthiest person because of inflation. I'm just pointing out that like 15 years ago, I don't even know if he had 100 billion. Yeah. Now he just made 100 billion in 5 days.
I think also because Elon Musk started investing more in Tesla. I think he invested $1 billion in Tesla, or he purchased. Right.
Well, but Elon Musk is going to get like $1 trillion pay package. That's crazy. You're going to have the world's first trillionaire. But what I'm saying is that even, billions of dollars isn't even so much now because Elon Musk is going to have a trillion.
I'll take $1 billion if anyone wants to donate.
Okay, Josh. If I see
but yes, I agree with you. The rate of inflation used to be the goal was 0, then it was 2%, and now it's like I feel like they're going to change it to 3%.
I think also what's interesting is if you're reflecting on economic history, and we can end on this, since the Great Recession in 2008, there really was no inflation and rates were very low for a very long time. And I think there were some economic theorists who were like, where is the inflation? Why so much money is being pumped into the economy, during the Obama administration. And there was the recession was so deep on the economy. We never saw that inflation. And there was this theory, maybe it doesn't matter. You could stimulate all you want and there'll never be inflation. And even during Biden, the inflation we have was definitely higher, but it was not the inflation of the 70s. Generally, America is a very mature economy, right? It's an advanced economy. We don't live in a time of rapid monetary. We live in a time of rapid monetary growth, but it doesn't seem to cause mass quick price changes. But I think now certainly wasn't, right, for 15 years until COVID, right, from the Great Recession. But now we're seeing, okay, we don't live in hyperinflation. We don't live in incredibly high inflation, but we're struggling. We're not where we were after the Great Recession. There is more consistent inflation, and inflation is eating at people's salaries. So it's unfortunate.
I just want to end off saying for all of the doom and gloom, I think for the pro-Israel supporters, there is also a lot of support still for Israel. And it actually happens to the Washington Free Beacon. You could check out the poll there. Said that despite all of the Tucker Candace stuff, support amongst Gen Z for Israel is still well over 50, almost 60%, which is really good for any poll. They still,
Right.
these people, they admit they like Tucker, they like Candace, but it doesn't seem to translate into hating Israel or conspiracy theories.
I think we see that ourselves. Nick Fuentes, you can laugh at the guy, doesn't mean you agree with everything he says. I would say Nick Fuentes has very bad views. He's a racist.
He's a
Racist terrible.
neo-Nazi.
You're right. I mean,
I
he
think
would
he would
maybe even
describe
describe
himself
himself
that
that
way.
way. But the point is more that it doesn't mean that he's right when he says, "Oh, people are accusing Israel without any."
I'm just
proof."
pointing out, not that he likes Nick Fuentes, that if you, just because you listen to someone, right? Just because this Free Beacon poll says people listen to Tucker Carlson, I think you're making a great point. That doesn't mean they listen to everything he says. It doesn't mean everything he says translates. And while we, who are very sensitive to these issues, listen and are rightly horrified by his rhetoric, it could be someone is listening to Candace Owens and saying, haha, she's talking about Frankus. That's so funny. And ironically, like maybe the less you know is actually better in these cases. Like, oh, haha, she thinks Jews did 9/11. And I don't think that, but it's funny. Okay, so I don't like that you think it's funny, but it's not translating into anything. And I don't know if that's good for the future, but at least for now, like
Right.
if you get offline, it seems to be good. I think we should be aware. I don't think we should dig our heads in the sand and say it's all Qatari money or this is all fake. And
And that's why I want to bring up this, like, we can't get lost in the internet world. We have
yeah,
to see
yeah.
this
Because
other
I
things
was gonna
happening.
say, at the end of the day, there are still people inspired and holding vigils for Charlie Kirk, and people in South Korea, London, and the United States celebrating Charlie Kirk and trying to do the right thing, be good people, go to shul, go to church, live with their families, be happy. Charlie Kirk actually started at the end of his life, unfortunately, keeping the Sabbath. He wrote a book that was supposed to come out about keeping the Sabbath because he thought it promoted good family and communal values. So a lot of people started doing that. And so there is goodness out there, people doing the right thing and mourning in an appropriate, non-grifter way that I think should inspire us and be the light in the darkness for what is a very fraught time. We hope that we could argue where we need to argue and be inspired from the things that are inspiring.
Right. All right.
Have
Thank you.
a good week.